Hello and welcome to DJI versus Sony Round 2. Now, in case you missed out on Round 1, a couple of weeks ago I did a comparison between the new DJI Pocket 3 and the Sony ZV-1, and in the tests I did, the DJI came out on top. Well, of course, Sony have a newer version of the ZV-1, the ZV-1 Mark II. And I thought, in fairness to Sony, I really should compare the Pocket 3 against Sony's newest version, the Mark II. Will it do any better than the original, or will it suffer the same fate? Stick around and find out. So when I did the comparison test between the Pocket 3 and the original ZV-1, I expected that the Pocket 3 would do pretty well, but I was a bit surprised at just how well it did, even outperforming the ZV-1 on certain tests. And so I think now the comparison test between the Pocket 3 and the newest version, the Mark II, is all the more important. Now, I did just post a comparison test comparing the new Mark II to the original ZV-1, and to be honest, I was not overly impressed with the changes that Sony has made to it, but there is one key difference that might make the Mark II perform a little bit better in this comparison, and that is, of course, the lens. You see, on the original ZV-1, the maximum you can zoom out is to a 24mm equivalent, whereas now on the new Mark II, it has a wider angle lens, allowing you to zoom all the way out to an 18mm equivalent, which is very comparable to the DJI Pocket 3, and I think that might help this perform a little bit better in the overall comparison. Now, clearly these are very different cameras, and they have features that will appeal to a different audience, but at their core, the primary function of these two cameras is the same, and that is capturing high quality video for vlogging and content creation. And that's what we're going to focus on in today's comparison. So we're really going to be focused in on the video quality and also the audio quality in different filming scenarios. Now, when I did the previous comparison for the Pocket 3 versus the original ZV-1, I had everything set to fully automatic, so I wanted to do more or less an out-of-the-box comparison. This time around, we're going to do it a little bit differently. Now, we're not going to do any post-processing of the images, but what we will do is, if we see in a particular scenario that there's a very simple setting that we can change on one camera or the other in order to try to improve the image quality, we'll apply that change, and obviously we'll talk about that when we get to that point. Now, as always, there's a lot to cover here, and you may not want to go through everything, so I've put the chapters up here. Those should also be available on the video timeline, so you can skip straight to the section or sections you are most interested in. And very importantly, the usual disclaimer: this video is not paid for or sponsored in any way. All of the equipment was purchased with my own money, and the opinions are entirely my own. Also, if you are enjoying the video, please remember to give us a thumbs up, and also please consider subscribing to the channel. If you have comments, questions, or other input, also please add them to the comment section. I love to hear from you guys. So let's start out in our studio setup. Now, clearly not a professional studio, more of a converted office/bedroom that we're dealing with here. My lighting setup is, I have some overhead cans which I have turned down to about 35%. It's actually quite dim in the room, but I also have two key lights set to a very low value just to provide some illumination from the front as well. So obviously we have both cameras set up side by side here, as you can see. I'm going to have a little bit of fun with you guys and not reveal which is which just yet. So let's just call the camera on your left camera A and the camera on your right camera B, and let's focus first of all on the video quality. So which do you think gives the best video quality? Now, I've been through quite a bit of footage from both of these two in order to optimize the settings. We'll talk about the settings in just a moment. And as far as my opinion is concerned, I find both cameras doing a really good job providing really good quality footage. Now, I'm by no means a professional, but I would be quite satisfied to use either of these two in order to produce my talking head studio type videos. Now, although, as I said, both cameras are doing a really good job, I'm happy with both images here, but I do find that camera B is much more accurate and true to life when it comes to the colors, whereas camera A tends to be a little bit more vivid, a little bit higher saturation, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I kind of like the more vivid color on that as well, but I guess it's all just a matter of personal preference. So take a look at the two videos and decide which you think is providing the best quality. So what about the audio quality? Now, so far during this clip, you've been listening to me on the onboard microphones of camera B, mainly because I think it just about has the edge when it comes to audio quality. But let's switch over to camera A and you can be the judge for yourselves. So both of these cameras clearly will support external microphones, but for the purpose of today's comparison test, we're only going to be focused on the onboard microphones. So as I said, you are now listening to me on the onboard microphones of camera A, and I find there's a little bit more of an echo on this one, and I'll talk about the settings also in just a moment as well, but let's switch back over to camera B so you can listen to me once again on camera B. So this is the onboard microphones of camera B. As I said, I find there's just a little bit less of an echo on this particular one. There really isn't much in it. I'll switch back over to camera A so you can judge for yourselves, but which do you think has the best sounding audio? So which camera is which? Well, camera A is the Sony ZV-1 Mark II, camera B is the DJI Pocket 3. So which one did you prefer? Did you guess which one was which? And were you surprised by the results? By all means, leave some comments in the comments section on this. Now, when it comes to the settings, now with the ZV-1, when I use it in the intelligent auto mode, what I find is that there's actually too much saturation in the image, and also the white balance is a little bit off, so the image is a little bit warmer than it should be. So the changes I made on the ZV-1 were to change the white balance to cool the image a little bit, push it more in the blue direction, and also I reduced the saturation just by a little bit. It's still, as I mentioned, vivid and a little bit oversaturated, but I think it's a very pleasant image that results because of those changes. When it comes to the DJI, the white balance problem was actually opposite. So when I left the auto white balance on, I found that the image was a little bit too cold, and I had to adjust it to make the image a little bit warmer. The other thing on the DJI was I found that it was overexposing a little bit, so I dropped down the exposure compensation to -1.3. Okay, so next up, let's do some outdoor walk and talk style video. This time I've decided to expand the image to the full frame so you can get a full view of not just myself but also my surroundings. Once again, I will keep you guessing for a few minutes as to which camera is which. Let's just once again call the camera on your left camera A and the camera on your right camera B. Now, just to start out, I would say that both are doing a pretty good job of exposing the subject. There's good detail, but as you can see, there is quite a difference when it comes to the background. So camera A is definitely doing a much better job of doing an overall exposure. You can see the blue in the sky, whereas on camera B, everything is pretty much blown out in the background. Now, if I turn around So I have a darker background. You can see that now camera B is doing a better job on the exposure. Now, right now you are listening to me on the onboard microphones of camera B. Let's switch over to camera A so you can hear the difference between the two. How does the audio compare between the two? Once again, I'll switch over to camera B and talk to you just a few more seconds before I switch back over to camera A so you can hear the difference between the two. Now outside, to be honest, I don't hear a lot of difference between the two. I think perhaps maybe camera B might be a little bit more of a rich, deep sound, but again, not a lot to choose between the two. Now I did promise walking and talking, so let's do a little bit of walking. And you can get an idea of the stability between the two. And at this point, I'm sure some of you have already guessed that camera B is in fact the Sony and camera A is the DJI. And obviously with the DJI, you have the gimbal head, whereas with the Sony, you have to turn on stabilization, and that's something we'll do right now. Okay, so now with the Sony Steady Shot turned on, you can see that the image should be more stable, but of course it's also cropped in slightly. So this is obviously one advantage for the DJI. Now, so far on the DJI, I do not have the face tracking enabled, and that's the next thing we'll do. So now, in addition to the stabilization, I also have face track enabled on the DJI. And that is a big advantage in this type of situation, as it means I don't have to continuously keep an eye on what I have my camera focused on. I can explain things around me as I'm walking around. I don't necessarily have to look at the screen in order to ensure that I continuously have my face in the right position in the field of view. Now, as far as the settings are concerned with this particular test, with the Sony, I have everything pretty much set to automatic. I did play around a little bit with the white balance, the exposure. I did play around with the face prioritization option and turned it on and off, and then eventually I decided to leave it turned on because this is the best image I could get. With the DJI, I did have to reduce the exposure a little bit. I also decreased the sharpness of the image to -1 because I find otherwise it's a little bit too harsh in this type of environment. And as far as the white balance is concerned, I just have that set to auto. Okay, let's shoot some B-roll. Now when it comes to image detail and sharpness, I think both cameras are fairly even. But camera A clearly has much better contrast and dynamic range. Looking into the shadows, I think both cameras are showing pretty good detail, but when I pan up to the sky, you'll see that camera A maintains the detail in the treetops and the color in the sky, whereas camera B is totally blown out. Looking at stability, I think it's pretty obvious which camera is which. Camera A, the DJI, is rock solid, whereas camera B, the Sony, is pretty shaky, even though all I'm doing here is standing still and slowly panning around. So let's turn on Sony's Steady Shot stabilization and take a walk. So here I'm trying to walk as slowly and smoothly as I possibly can. Now with stabilization turned on, the Sony's definitely better than before, but you can still see a little bit of shakiness in the image. Whereas the DJI continues to provide rock-solid stabilized footage. Now, just for fun, I decided to see how this would look if I walked a little more aggressively, or even broke out into a jog. Now the Sony does have its strengths, but this is clearly not one of them. Whereas the DJI stabilization is as good as any action camera, but because this is mechanically stabilized, the image quality will be even better. So for the first part of our low light test, we are in low light, not yet complete darkness. And as you can see, camera A is already struggling to produce a clear and noise-free image. Now, I'm sure most of you are aware that the DJI has a dedicated low light mode, so it won't come as a surprise that camera A is the Sony and camera B is the DJI. However, I haven't actually turned on the low light mode yet. Let's do that now. So now we are in complete darkness and I have the low light mode enabled on the DJI. Now I do think the new wide-angle lens on the Mark II helps the Sony perform better than the original ZV-1 did when I ran a similar test. But as you can see, it's clearly no match for the DJI. So, did the Sony ZV-1 Mark II fare any better against the DJI Pocket 3 than its older sibling? Well, from my perspective, I have to say that's a no. Overall, in the tests that we did, I think the DJI showed superior image quality throughout. Now, the sharpness of the image and the detail in the image, I think, was probably the same between the two, but the DJI really excelled when it came to things like the dynamic range, the contrast. Of course, the stability was just so much better than the Sony, the low light performance, and then you've also got things like the tracking capability, all features that really help you get better videos. Now, that's not to say that the Sony is a bad camera or a bad choice, and in fact, in some filming scenarios, I think the Sony might actually make more sense. For example, if the majority of your videos are shot indoors in a well-lit environment, and the camera mounted in place, such as a talking head video or an overhead type shot, then I think the Sony might actually be a better choice. In that kind of situation, the image quality will be pretty much the same as you would get on the DJI, but the zoom lens will give you much more flexibility in terms of framing your image or even getting closer to your subject. And of course, the fact that it's an optical zoom means you can do so without any compromise of the resolution or image quality. Other things that the Sony has got going for it, if you delve into the menus of the two different cameras, you'll find on the DJI it's very simplistic, there are very few settings, and a lot of people like it exactly that way. However, if you really want to get creative, you can delve into the Sony menu and you'll find a plethora of different settings and features that you can experiment with in order to get more creative footage. Now, you could probably do much of that also using the DJI, but then you'll have to do that in post-processing. The difference here is the Sony has a lot of these features built directly in. But when it comes to an all-round camera that's going to give you the best video quality in a wide variety of filming environments, then the DJI is really hard to beat. And of course, it does so at a much lower price than the Sony. So the DJI currently retails for a list price of just $519 versus the Sony at $899. That is a big difference in price. And again, you've got a lower price for what I believe is actually a better camera. So there you have it. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed the video and got good information out of it. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have input or suggestions for future videos, please add those into the comment section. I love to hear from you guys. And if you enjoyed the video, please give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for a lot more videos on tech, travel, and leisure. Thank you again for watching.